I'm going to erase and talk through a barrier, unless there's any questions or commentary on that piece. You thought of the 4 fields as a diagnostic? You thought of the components of the missionary task as a diagnostic? We used to use it, Jeff used to teach us to use it as a Great Commission Christian interview. How do you guys connect the lost people? Tell me what you do.
That's good.
When you're sharing the gospel, would you say the field's saturated with seed? How many are hearing the gospel today? Where do the sowers come from? Tell us about it. Hey, as the seed is out there, what do you do when they say yes? Oh, who can and who can't? And sometimes the question is sow the seed, but in follow-up, how does baptism authority work in your network and in your churches? How does that go? How does it get passed? All those questions that go right around the missionary task and anticipate biblical answers. And every one of those are our 6 shooters are ready with Bible studies, right? Not that we're going to immediately listen and then assume the teaching role, but we're listening for where any link in the chain might be missing. And at the right time, with the right teachable heart, Bible's open, how do we link it up? Any thought on that? You guys are the easiest audience I've ever tried to teach in my life. Okay, so check this out. Church formation. I said, with thanks to Taylor's here, there not too many organizations begin here. But organizations eventually in this process are going to have to wrestle with that question, how do we form local churches? When it's not typically the initial starting point of conversation, truth is a lot of times how do you form churches? How do you go about church planting? The critical path exercise we just discussed. If we put that in front of people, we won't always get the disciple cycle immediately on the board. We won't always get a critical path. We've been working on and trying to theorize for a while, trying to capture. I think the first place we used this was at Longview Point. In fact, it was. And just for the record, Pastor Wade loved it. Okay, he was in his first year then.
Okay.
This is Wade, the younger, not Wade from Heights, right? Yeah. We had guys from the Mississippi Baptist. We had guys from Bellevue / Mid-American Seminary. We had guys from the Memphis Metro Association. And we had some wild and crazy NPL guys from Memphis named Ron and Zach and Trey Clenny. No, not Trey Clenny. What was his name?
Trey Bogus. Yeah.
Huh?
Bogus. Yeah.
That's it. And with the guy with the gauges, you know Trey, right?
Yeah.
Well, he was the wild card in the room. And they all had a different. When they said we do church planting, they all meant something. They all had a different model to pursue it. So we put 4 models of church planting generically onto the board and asked them first question: which one is God using? And just as a spoiler, the answer is all of them. Okay. That said, I'm going to draw 4 models of church planting today. And they're basically generic. Most of the reading you can do and most of the models you will see in the field are going to fit generically into one of these 4 categories. Okay? Josh, you heard this yesterday. So feel free to help out if you want. All right? Let me show you a pre-existing church with the shepherd, the leader, the elder overseer, and the stars representing members around them. Okay? Now, the reason we're showing this is that a lot of the IMBers around the world that we're going to engage, I'm suggesting all of them are basically using one of these models, but they may not actually be self-aware that they use a model and other models exist. Does that make sense? So here's a pre-existing church. I'm going to call this the incubator model. Everybody seen this before? Okay, even I mean to say the illustration, but you have an idea what I mean by incubator model? Usually inside this pre-existing church, as it grows, whether by a demographic survey or the reality that parking is saturated, whatever it might be, as they grow, incubator model suggests that they can draw a circle around a group of believers inside the church and teach them to gather, teach them to become church. Over time, as they gather and envision, equip, and intensify the incubation, maybe the demographic study says this group is chosen because they live 20 miles away in this suburb. We're going to teach them, we're going to incubate them together, and when their time is right, we're going to launch them out. Sometimes it's called a hiving model. From the hive, we're sending out a group of bees to start a new hive. Once the time is right, they'll send that group out. Start gathering, worshiping, churching in the next adjacent field. And almost like a ready-made church, the incubator launches a new church that's already up and running. You seen that model? You guys okay? You still with me? Okay? Incubator. Second one we'll call the assessment model. Here we've got a number of pre-existing churches. That have, by vision, decided to cooperate to identify, assess is the name of the model, identify and send church planting candidate to another field, who then typically plants and pastors the church that they start. Okay? The distinctions in this model would be a candidate pool that not necessarily from within the church, but from some particular designated source. A candidate pool submit applications, they're assessed, and presumably the candidates with the closest match to the profile or to the standard for church planting envisioned by the cooperating sending base is identified and sent. You seen that model? Typically over a period of 7 years, it used to be with NAM, 5, 3, and some other North American Mission Board. My father, not with North American Mission Board, has been involved in this model in the past.
This is currently NAM's model, more or less.
Yeah.
In most cases, as a matter of support base, the sending church or churches use a descending pay scale. 5 years, 3 years, with this basic working assumption that as they decrease support, the local church gathering around the planter increases, takes over the support. You realize that in most cases, that institutionalizes the planter to pastor model. As funding decreases, the assumption that local church funding increases, it's natural for them to want to feed their kids. They take the role of the pastor and assume that role going forward. Okay? Assessment model. Both the incubator and the assessment model have perceived strengths, perceived liabilities. We'll get back to that perhaps. Okay? Next. You guys still with me?
Yep.
Here we have a pre-existing church that has taken up a training model, a vision within the leadership of the church to train and deploy perhaps even a profile or even every member of the church to go and start other churches. At times, an individual believer in the church goes out and puts to work what they've been trained to do and starts a new church. They may even become the leader of that church. What's unique in this case is that, as we call this the membership squared model, they remain committed at both the church where they're being mentored and the church that they're planting. They navigate back and forth as a church member and as a church planter pastor in the churches or church that they're planting. You with me? What does membership squared mean? Mentored, committed to two. Mentored in one, planting another. We used to call this the Kumar model. When we were in and out of Dimapur, North India, you could go, and even this day I imagine you could go to Kumar Pillai's house on a Sunday. The church is gathered. Ask who of you have planted a church, and many from the congregation will raise their hand. They're still being mentored, but they've also planted. Okay? You ever seen this model? Yes. Yeah. Sweet. Last one. Anybody know what HOP stands for? Got a Christian community that identifies, stands behind a group that goes, usually 2 by 2 perhaps, plants a church, raises up and at times even appoints a leader from within the local harvest, and then continues to itinerate. What's distinct about the model? Sending base behind them, similar to the assessment model, but in this case, as they go and they establish, they do not assume the pastor model. Instead, they also exit, continue to itinerate to reproduce the process. In which case, the local leaders would emerge from the harvest. Thus, the title, House of Peace, Person of Peace, is often synonymous with this type of model, assuming that the leadership for the next generation church will come from the harvest.
You're misbeing IMB. That's one example.
Yes, what I'm suggesting to you today, Justin, to your point, inside the IMB, all these models are being utilized.
Understood, yeah. Yeah, follow.
Okay? So, as soon as we put that up, we start to ask the question about perceived strengths and liabilities. But as a prerequisite, I'll just repeat it. Which one of these models is God using?
Oh.
What a radical and beautiful statement a few years ago in Memphis, when the no place left practitioners had a chance to say to the Mississippi Baptists, we believe God is using you. And vice versa. Okay? To put on the table the potential that God uses these different models, in some cases in different contexts. Okay? Typically, just for the spoiler, models above the line predominant in the West. Typically, models above the line predominant in quotes, churched contexts. Typically, models below the line, and even extensively, utilized in the East, in the majority world. Typically, models below the line used in pioneering contexts. But more and more, honestly, with the global conversation, globalization, social media, YouTube models out there extensively available at any point to any percentage of Great Commission task force, you can get retweeted, as Andy said the other day. These models are blurring both in the East and the West. They're blurring and beginning to get larger and larger market share both in church and unchurched contexts. And there are strengths and liabilities in all of those stipulations I just put on the table. So, at the top left, discussion time. What are the perceived strengths of the incubator model? It's fascinating that whatever we answer right here, the perceived strength, at other times, by other voices, will actually be the perceived weakness of the model.
Control.
Is a strength?
I don't know if it's somewhat.
Touche. As an example,
Yeah, control
the
process.
perceived strength of the incubator model is control. Now that might sound like a negative term. Let's use the word fidelity.
Thank you.
Let's use the word stability. Let's use the word quality control.
Want to control the candidate for sure. You have time with them in your church.
And it makes sense, right? If we've got a year or 2 year on-ramp to watch and learn and invest and put some pressure on it to see what is smelted out of them, in the crucible of our examination, there's a good chance that we have as one of our core values stability.
A rate of success.
Okay?
Yeah.
A perceived strength that says these churches that are ready-made and well-backed, well-vetted, have a higher percentage of sustainability.
That's a better one.
Good?
I was thinking, when you mentioned fidelity, I was thinking the DNA of the group that goes out,
Yeah.
right? They're going to be more vetted, more,
Tested.
yeah, to where they are going to probably.
Okay? Tested,
They hold
refined,
together.
they sorted out some problem solving, they know what to do when challenges come because that's been coached and examined. There's been an audience for all of that crucible. By the time they go, they've had some reps in problem solving. Okay? We can be sure not only of the quality testing of the believers, but of the teaching. Man, those who hold orthodoxy of high standard, high value, will gravitate toward a model like this because they've known, even trained and equipped and evaluated the teaching or the teachers, put in a position of leadership to be sent. Have you ever heard or seen a campus model? A lot of times this is how campus models begin. I love when Capitol Hill demands that these churches need to be released over time. That if we're not at some point erasing that line of connection, whether it's financial or even decision making toward a congregational decision empowerment and autonomy, at some point we would cease to call those Baptist churches because one church might be over another. A perceived weakness if we never release. Right? Thank you, Capitol Hill, for demanding we release. Right? Other challenges we might think on this model? Got a high bar of strengths, perceived strengths. What would be some perceived weaknesses?
Length of time and preparation.
Length of time and preparation. The percentage of folks involved or even able to fill such a role. The time it might take to incubate within.
Typically with that model, that planting church, it might start as a school, but the expectation will be that it has a building within time, within the time frame. So it's an expensive model.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
When the next generation church is incubated inside, how do they define success? Presumably, what is it they're trying to reproduce? All the weight and the potential, the polish, the skill, the precision, the expertise of the previous generation at times will be assumed in the necessary reproduction of the next gen.
Yeah, I would say.
And that does inevitably require significant time.
Yeah, in that model,
And finance.
you wouldn't consider replanting until you're a certain size, so
Okay.
you can't reproduce quickly.
So what does reproduction look like? Let's assume we're talking just beyond the polish and skill to the actual carrying capacity and size. If this church reached 500 in order to send 50, or 1,000 in order to send 100, how long does it take this church to get to 1,000? How long does it take before this church perceives they have the carrying capacity to reproduce? And of course, finance, what type of building, what type of sound system, what type of seating capacity, what type of parking, all of those anecdotal examples we have of the quality and the quantity come to bear in even the consideration of reproduction. So, in many cases, the incubator model results in high quality addition. You buy that? One more challenge. In most cases, even the demographic pre-existing culture of the previous generation is reproduced in the subsequent generation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say ethnicity necessarily, but the church culture of the mother is most typically stamped upon and assumed by the daughter. Right? Worship style, liturgy. In which case, going cross-cultural with such a model presents some challenges. In church history, read Roland Allen, define paternalism, define colonialism, if you like. There's some challenges, cross-cultural. Okay? Strengths, perceived strengths of an assessment model. We're going to see some similarities, right? What would be the perceived strengths of a candidate pool from which we select a candidate to send? In this case, we can look outside the church for potential candidates. Where the seat sowers or church planters are going to come from might be as wide as the internet if we're selecting and sorting through applications. So we might be able to fish from a much broader pool of candidates. What else would be perceived strengths? Same kind of quality, same kind of vetting. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, maybe a strength compared to the previous model, but it's
Okay.
less geography dependent.
Yeah. This is one where we don't just have to send across town with a group of 30 willing to commute. We might send them to Salt Lake City. Right? In which case they might also consider this more likely to go cross-cultural. If we're targeting Mormons in that case, right? Good?
Great sending capacity.
Okay.
Financially, maybe.
By cooperating, even a church that doesn't get to 1,000, and yet a church of 100, a church of 50 could participate in giving and sending. That through that cooperative kind of mindset, that brings on more mobilization of sending and giving. That's good. Someone else? Why are we doing this exercise ad nauseum with this group of church planners, practitioners? Is this a model that we could use, that we could actually bring to bear to a platform conversation? All of you guys relate to churches. Even some of you work in church offices that use a variety of these models. And God's using them. How do we platform conversation without stones that allow us to begin to evaluate, even contrast? That's what we're trying to just give you a rep. Is this a tool for conversation that you might put in your bag to bring out when the time's right?
By tool, the discussion of the church models.
Say again?
You're saying by tool, the discussion
Yes.
of all four models.
Could you reproduce what I've done so far? Here's an example. And you realize most organizations, most church planning efforts are using some combination of these. And every one of these is nuanced in ways that, even if you read these books, you're not going to clearly identify one without some semblance of the other.
Yeah.
Okay? You with me? Is it worth, we keep on like it's a rep and trying the tool? And we keep moving forward and think through some conclusions? Assessment model, perceived liabilities. What would be the perceived weaknesses of the assessment model?
Disconnect from church, mentorship, pastor disconnect a little bit.
Yeah. In some ways, we're looking for the ready-made leader. We may not have raised them up within without the same audience and potential time to look and really vet through a crucible, as we said. This is a little bit more of a disconnect, is the word? What's
And
the
this
word?
isn't picking on NAM, I'm just acknowledging the model. NAM has to build a substantial SIN network apparatus to get around those people, to care for them, provide leadership, and train them, ongoing care and training.
To NAM's credit, I think they see that, and they're
Correct.
doing everything they can to plan for
Strengthen
it.
it, right?
Absolutely, with their coaching and their communities of practice in the Sin cities. Meanwhile, having to put all of those concessions and plans in place is an acknowledgement of the potential liability if they're isolated on their own without a coach.
Yeah.
Good point. Someone else?
Essentially farming out the Great Commission.
Okay. Does it relieve?
People and- Yeah.
Does it relieve these folks?
Yeah.
I got to go with Josh and Andy yesterday. Doesn't matter what organizations and context, but we sat with a brother who's trying to mobilize out of his church, and he's got an organization that comes in and basically says, hey, look what we're doing overseas, just support church planters over there. And his great gripe was, you're just inoculating, you're just allowing those not involved in mission to send a check rather than get involved, which is actually what they need. You're allowing, isn't that basically what they're potentially that's a liability. If these folks consider their contribution to the Great Commission giving to sin, thank you. Have you gone? Do you have a reason to go if you can find someone else to go? How do we get them out of the seat and moving? I think we heard that yesterday, pretty articulate yesterday. Very much. Any other challenges, liabilities?
That wasn't me, because it is me. Our
No.
church, when I came back to First, it was the same story. There was
Okay.
a great divide
Yeah.
that we attempted to rebuild, that we have rebuilt in a lot of ways, but it's...
Way to go.
Well, it's a challenge.
That example was not in this room.
That's what I was like,
But you can
read my
fellowship
mail?
with the
You
challenge.
listen to my phone calls, dude? Yeah. But that was it. No, a personal example here for everybody. That's exactly where I found myself 10 years ago back at First, and love it. And they love what has happened.
Okay.
It's just there had grown over time a disconnect.
Yeah.
The inoculation was real. Great Commission there on the mission statement. Us
Man.
doing it, we had to do some work to get back there.
Applause, praise to the Lord for what He's doing, prayer for more laborers, checks written,
Checks, yeah.
exempting me from the need
Correct.
to go. A lot of pure motives all along. Don't mean to throw stones, but perceived. Anything else? What about the pool of candidates who are told no?
You're not ready.
What is it, 1 out of 10 who are?
Yeah.
And the broader the base of candidate pool, the smaller percentage we actually have budget to send.
So the top two go together quite often, because if they say you're not ready, incubate more.
Okay.
I've heard that even very clearly articulated within our own, context,
Good.
context back home. So
A
they're
lot
like,
of
if they're not
cases-
ready, they should stay here another year or two. I've heard that exact statement from
Okay.
a leader.
Get back in and
Yeah.
be incubated.
Grow up a bit more, grow some skill.
There's some networks out there working with inside the SBC that initially started with sending college students to plant churches. They got their feet in the fire enough times that now they don't send anyone to be an elder under 30. By the way, I think those churches have every right to make that decision. As a good autonomy and congregational decision-making kind of advocate, I think they have every right to make that decision. Nevertheless, 30 seems a bit arbitrary, right? How do they...
Especially if you impose it on another culture like that.
Okay, and if you actually begin to export that to others, that presumed principle goes right along, but it's no longer a preference, it's a tradition. That's the way it must be done. Good point. What about that candidate pool that's told you're not the right candidate? The danger and the fear of discouragement, even demobilizing 90% of the applicants, because they have assumed I don't have what it takes, or I'm not the type they're looking for. I must not be good enough.
Yeah.
That's what we said yesterday, right? That finding the qualified candidate then disqualifies the vast majority, and they may not have the incubator model to go back into for development.
Yeah.
So then do they just move on to something else?
And you realize that the entire process can be vicious, because the broader the candidate pool that exists, the higher we can up the bar.
Yeah, correct.
In the name of stewardship, right?
That's right, because we want to send the most God prepared.
Right.
And we're going to be, the broader the pool, the more we'll have to tell, and the higher the bar we can raise in skill and experience and commitment and passion, whatever we're looking for. Eventually, vast majority don't meet the bar.
So then success is defined by parameters like qualifications rather than scalability and reproduction.
And in the end, the getting over the bar, the deployment is based on our budget. If we could send more, that way we would, right?
Oh, yeah.
So those we can't send, in part, are told they can't go because we don't have the resources, budget. Okay.
A very simple side note, seems obvious, but the standard as it's raised with a wider pool, the entry levels of that program also grows with that exit level. What's interesting though is like, where do those people get that high level of skill to begin with, to jump to that initial hurdle, to be to gain entry? Where I've known some high quality people not even gain entry for one reason or another to some of these programs because of whatever need. Perceived lack of success in the future is what they're doing. They're, looking at models, stats, whatever they've got, or just judgments. Predicting failure, correct.
Almost inevitably, in a candidate pool assessment model, we're going to inevitably introduce qualifications that are extra biblical.
Yeah.
Right?
That are preferential or traditional.
With all the right motives of stewardship and
Purity of doctrine.
security, stability.
Purity of doctrine is a big one. That's a pure motivator.
Sure.
Lack of resource, we already said that.
So we had a chance to talk to an assessment model that my dad introduced me to one time, and simply asked the question, can Cornelius make it through your model?
Yeah.
Is there room for new believers, for new churches to start with new believers above the line? Is there potential for leaders to emerge from the harvest above the line? If Cornelius can't make it through our assessment, Cornelius walks out the door, so does our chance to ever start new churches stack-fold around new believers. I didn't call them elders on day one, but the chance for them to emerge from the harvest when someone else, even like my dad, don't think I'm poking outside the household here. When my dad walks through with his 30 years of pastoral experience and skill in teaching and exegeting and expositing the Word, Cornelius is going to sit down. If he won't make it through the model, do we have the potential to start new churches with new believers? Do we have the potential to raise up leaders out of the harvest to shepherd their oikos, their culture, their worldview through the washing of the Word? I realize that already sounds reckless, doesn't it? The stability, the fidelity, the orthodoxy all comes into risk as soon as I ask those questions. So with that thing in mind, what are the perceived weaknesses below the line? Instability, risk, heresy. Perceived weaknesses below the line, right?
Heresy, syncretism.
Syncretism.
Lack of stewardship, as money could be wasted for failed attempts.
You're doing training, on-the-job training for something as fundamental and as precious as shepherding a new flock? How can that be orthopraxy? How can that be fidelity?
How can that be wise?
Wise. How's that not unacceptable risk? Of course, you all know that the spoiler is that we called it a pioneering context already. I'm okay with that. It just so happens to be the entirety of the New Testament was pioneering. And honestly, this is the first of the three models we can demonstrate in Scripture. That Paul the risk taker. Jerusalem, what kind of risk is it when they were meeting daily house to house, when they were meeting publicly with the apostles for their teaching, and I presume, it says breaking bread, prayer, in the homes, they were reproducing everything they'd learned from the apostles' teaching corporately, publicly, they were reproducing in the homes. What was it we said yesterday? Roger Gearing, House Church and Mission, first century Jerusalem. We have one example of a house of 120, right? Mm-hmm. Acts 1. Average house in Jerusalem in the first century, 30 people max. So if you baptize 3,000 in one day, you're organizing 100 houses over the weekend, where they're hearing corporate, presumed public teaching at the temple and devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching in their homes. That's how I would read Acts 2. And thank goodness they did, because when Acts 8:1 came and they scattered all over the known world, they knew what to do. They knew what to do. Barnabas and others could go and see evidence of the Holy Spirit's hand upon them. Ongoing instruction, absolutely. And yet they were being mentored and they were practitioners. They were being mentored and they were practitioning. That's how I've read Acts 2. Disagree if you like. Perceived strengths. Just like this, the question comes, will we ever release?
Yeah.
Will these be Baptist churches or not? Not if they're under the thumb of the previous generation. So the how and the where. Now, meanwhile, we might like for that leader to go and get ongoing theological education, and where there is no seminary, how do they do that? They come back and forth. They continue to get mentored. Presumably the believers in the next gen reside here. The leader might be membership of 2, but the believers are membership of this one, even presumably going out to reproduce again.
I think a perceived strength could also be a perceived weakness is the DNA chain. Right?
Again?
Like a DNA chain. There's better chance that DNA is going to pass on because there's an ongoing, for better or worse. Is that a strength or a weakness? It depends on the DNA.
To my point, it would be the exact argument as a strength here.
Right.
We can ensure the DNA looks like the mother.
Right.
And when fidelity and stability and orthodox, the pieces we hold high are the perceived strengths. Meanwhile, that might actually be the argument here. The perceived strength of DNA might lead to next generation reproduction, or every member ministry, every member expectation, mass mobilization. How do we call it? It's interesting we would use the same argument, strength, weakness, to point at the other. Any other strengths on mentoring squared? I said it yesterday, I'm convinced, having some experience in church planting around the world and having looked at some organizations that pursue church planting, I honestly am convinced that model, more churches are planted with the membership squared model than all the others combined around the world. I think that this is, I might even say by far, my perception, more churches are planted in this model, this quadrant, than all the others combined. Now, going to the last model, spoiler before we talk strengths and weaknesses, having watched people group engagement for a good chunk of our life, I would tell you, I think more unengaged, unreached peoples are engaged with this model than all the others combined.
So below the line east, typically eastern, to that side, typically near culture or same culture, this side cross-culture.
Mhm.
Fair enough?
So even the 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's
Do
good.
you see similarities here?
Yeah.
Do you see similarities here?
Mm.
In the identification of the Acts 2, the Holy Spirit set apart from me, Paul, Barnabas, in them. The difference being, did they become the insider?
Yeah.
Or did they
Insider, outsider.
identify and appoint the insider?
Mm.
The cross-cultural dynamic, the same culture challenge. When we flip the script, paternalism versus the loss of and the perceived need of risk, issue of risk. They relate to each other, in which case a lot of organizations are working a combination. Last week, I put these models in front of two brothers who are mobilizing and training the Baptist Convention of Brazil for national sending all over Brazil. They said, we do this. Well, first of all, they said, we've been taught this, but we can't afford it.
Mm.
They said, we do this, but then subsequent generations, our workers go cross-culturally like this, but subsequent generations do this.
Mm.
Yeah.
Entry through a Luke 10 style equipping and then identification and empowering, and then oikos, oikos, oikos to generations of reproduction.
That's what we've seen in India so much. Right?
And I was like,
That's
of course that's what you do.
Yeah.
Of course that's what you see. So people group engagement, cross-cultural engagement toward multiplication below the line. And I got to tell you guys, one of the major reasons who can and who can't be mobilized and how much does it cost.
Mm.
Our preference, our assumption for fidelity, for vetting, for assessment does come with a price tag. I would challenge you to show me a model above the line that's being run for less than 6 figures annually.
Mhm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is like the definition of church, right? Like below the line, bricks and mortar, not necessarily, right?
Now, what does that have to do, even as we're videoing, with the IMB? If and where IMB teams, clusters, maybe even affinities at times write job requests, approve job requests for IMB missionaries to go as pastors, or even plant to pastor model. We're challenged in the Foundation's document commitment to indigeneity. Can these churches be self-governing, self-propagating, self-identifying, self-instructing and teaching? Can they be self-governing with an outside missionary introducing culture? It would take an exceptional missionary. But on top of all of that, can they ever be self-supported? If the IMB is funding the presumed planter to pastor at $80,000 a year. Those realities are our questions. Those realities are our wrestling matches. The value of actually having the conversation about preferred models, at times the assumptions are unexamined. So even with a pure motive, all those pure motives we talked about above the line, not necessarily equaling practice that the IMB can even afford, that the cross-cultural missionary should ever assume. So says 200 years of missions history we call the modern mission movement, Roland Allen, paternalism, colonialism, or for that matter, the desire to reproduce and multiply churches over time. Can they be healthy with an outside culture? Can they ever actually examine their own culture and wash it with the word if culture is introduced and imposed? Can they ever actually be self-supported, self-governed, if the shepherd leading them is paid on a different continent? You hear the challenges, right? Okay. In the morning, you were interested in getting involved. This afternoon, we're putting some cold water on it. Serious issues. Do we have the skills in this room to navigate, to platform conversations without the stones, without hitting somebody when they're not looking with a rock? Can we open the Word of God and make the apologetic case? Here's where it comes to a rub. I've read books on believers' baptism. One of my absolute theological heroes is Thomas Schreiner. I'll read, if you can show me anything he wrote, I'm going to try to memorize it. Excellent writer. I can show you edited volumes, not with Schreiner, but with others who have said, in the matter of infant baptism, written for the most part about avoiding pedobaptism, believer's baptism, sign of the new covenant. That's the name of the book. And in the end, near the end of the book, there's chapters that suggest a waiting period is preferred, is actually prudent between conversion and baptism, and the suggested argument would be, though we don't see this example in Scripture, it is culturally prudent, as in a churched culture we would not expect the pioneering context of the New Testament to provide us everything we need to know. That's as best as I can make a quote. And wouldn't that be exactly what the pedobaptists would argue about baptizing biological infants? Isn't that exactly the argument they spent the whole book putting down?
Yeah.
In a church context, we shouldn't expect, because the New Testament is pioneered, necessarily in the first century, we wouldn't expect the New Testament to give us practice, everything we would need to adopt for practice in a church context with prudence. That's the basic working argument that's swallowed. I might have to be okay with that. I might not have a better argument. I thank God I get to work in a pioneer context, number one. Because I can run there and say, wouldn't this be the pattern? And feel pretty good about it, sleep pretty well. I might have to accept that that's the reality. Here's where it becomes a rub. Don't take the model you've accepted by wisdom in the church context and take it back to the edge where you've admitted the pioneer work looks a lot like the New Testament. Why would we ever reintroduce
Chaos.
what we've acknowledged as a preference in the silence of Scripture in a church context?
So you're back to Platt's quote, that the state of the church determines.
Good. Good. I can agree and rest and encourage those churches that would prefer another model in a church context to be autonomous and make their own decisions as they go forward.
But
It's hard when we're going to pay $60K, $70K, $80K a year for a family to go back with a church context model into a pioneer setting and demand that above the line is the only way to do it. Which one is God using? At some point we have to acknowledge He's using He's using churches in the East. For sure. I get a little grumpy in the middle of it. I'm going to back off in just a second. If I ever came to the U.S. and criticized the models above the line, rightly, I would get called pretty quick to say, be careful you're not criticizing the bride. Meanwhile,
it doesn't go there.
it's amazing when we talk about how and what the IMB is up to in the East, as if we're the church planners, with our partners, how quickly we might criticize or dismiss churches for whom Christ died and intends to hold up Ephesians 3 as a testimony of the manifold wisdom of God in the heavens. Let's be careful about criticizing below the line. Right? That's fair, isn't it? Thoughts on this?
Go ahead, sir.
So it's okay to say we plant Southern Baptist churches in New Hampshire,
Okay.
but we do not plant any Southern Baptist churches in South Asia.
We've never painted a signboard, let's just say it that way. But we planted a lot of autonomous congregational polity practicing, free church tradition, priesthood of the believer, sufficiency of the word Baptistic churches, Baptist churches.
Yeah.
We just haven't hung Southern Baptist on
That's
it
right.
by connecting them to us.
They're theirs.
Yeah.